Hey everyone, welcome back to the Energy Blueprint Podcast. I'm your host, Ari Witten, and today I have with me JJ Virgin, who I will read you her official bio here. She's a triple board certified nutrition expert and fitness Hall of Famer, which I hope to be one day. She helps people over 40 break through food and carb intolerances so they can finally lose the weight to transform their health and their lives. She's a prominent TV and media personality whose previous features include co-host of TLC's Freaky Eaters, which was a cool show, by the way. 2 years as the on-camera nutritionist for weight loss challenges on Dr. Phil, and appearances on PBS, Dr. Oz, Rachel Ray, Access Hollywood, and The Today Show. She also speaks regularly and has shared the stage with notables including Seth Godin, Lisa Nichols, Gary Vaynerchuk, Mark Hyman, Dan Buettner, and Mary Morrissey. She's the author of 4 New York Times bestseller. I also hope I can say that about myself one day. The Virgin Diet Cookbook, JJ Virgin's Sugar Impact Diet, and JJ Virgin's Sugar Impact Diet Cookbook. Her latest book, Warrior Mom, 7 Secrets to Bold, Brave Resilience, shows mothers everywhere how to be strong, positive leaders for their families while exploring the inspirational lessons that JJ has learned as she fought for her own son's life. And that's actually going to be something we talk about in this show today. She hosts the popular JJ Virgin Lifestyle Show podcast with over 4.5 million downloads and counting. She also regularly writes for Rodal Wellness, Mind Body Green, and other major blogs and magazines. And her website is jjvirgin.com. So welcome to the show, JJ. Such a pleasure to finally have you.
Yeah, my gym buddy.
Yes.
Well, no longer gym buddy.
I know you moved away, but yeah, I used to see JJ at the gym with her husband all the time, which was cool. And I will also say on a personal note, I've learned a huge amount from her. She runs a summit for health experts called Mindshare Summit, and it's been an honor to learn from her. So it's cool to finally have you on the show.
Yes,
yeah, so I want to talk to you about your latest book, Warrior Mom, 7 Secrets to Bold, Brave Resilience. You have a crazy, crazy story that no one would ever, I mean, people pray that this never happens to them, and it happened to you. And and this was kind of what inspired this book. I would love if you could talk about your story of what you went through and what inspired you to write this book.
Yeah, never wish for a great story.
Yeah.
And here's the crazy thing about that, Ari. I've always felt that I'm a very powerful manifester, so be careful what you wish for. And I remember the day before this all happened, I was at a conference, and they'd spent a lot of time at this conference teaching the hero's journey. And I remember walking out of that conference thinking, I got no hero's journey, right? Like, I got nothing. I don't have a good story. Boom. So don't wish for that, So before the Virgin Diet was coming out, it was only a couple weeks before the Virgin Diet was coming out, which is an insane time because, first of all, I had invested everything into this book. I'm the sole financial support for my family. And it was just, I was going to do whatever I needed to do to get this work out into the world because I felt like it really could make a big impact. So that's the setup. My kids are 15 and 16. I'm a single mom. I support them. And my son goes out for a walk at dusk. And the next thing I know, my ex-husband and my 15-year-old come running in the house and say, Grant's got hit by a car and he was airlifted to the local hospital. And, it's so crazy when you kind of look back at this because I don't even know who did this next hour or so because it was like I was watching a movie. I remember throwing my laptop and all of these things into a tote bag. Like, what the heck was I doing? Like, why do I feel that I need to bring these things? But I brought all these things with me, and we rushed off to the hospital, and the doctor ushered us into a room and told us that basically we needed to let our son go, that he had been the victim of a hit and run. And he had a torn aorta, which kills 90% of people right on the scene. And he said, it's hanging on by an onion skin. And if we don't repair it in the next 24 hours, sometime in the next 24 hours, starting now, it's going to rupture. He goes, but the type of surgery he needs is very specialized and requires, we can't do it here because he's got multiple brain bleeds and you cannot do the surgery that we do here. We use blood thinners. His brain would bleed out. He was in a deep coma. He had something called diffuse axonal injuries. The good news is he still had brain activity, but he was in a deep, deep coma, like the highest level coma you could be in. And then, and it's interesting, perspectives, everything. When my kids were little, I remember the first time Grant like hit his mouth and a little blood, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And, now here he'd broken both femurs. He had his shin bone sticking through his skin. He was covered in road rash.
Wow.
But, that's like minor compared to all the other things. And literally when we walked in to see him, my ex-husband and my son Bryce and I, here he is lying on a stretcher. He looks like the Incredible Hulk because he's so swollen. He's covered in glass and road rash. He's got, it is just unbelievable. And I looked at it as if I was looking at a movie, because in your mind as a parent, it could not possibly be real. Like you can't, your whole thing's going, not real. Nope, not happening here,
Yeah.
And, we talked to the doctor. The doctor's like, he's never going to survive an airlift to the next hospital. You're going to have to let him go. And, Bryce is looking at him, and the doctor says, he won't survive the airlift. Even if he survived the airlift, he's not going to survive the surgery. Even if he survived the surgery, he'd be so brain damaged, it wouldn't be worth it. And my son looks at him and goes, well, maybe like there's a 0.25% chance he could make it. And he goes, that sounds about right, son. Like as if don't even bother. And Bryce looks at him and goes, well, we'll take those odds.
Yeah.
You look at it and go, it's not zero. And I remember I walked outside, I took a little break, and I wanted to check in. I've always been super close. It was interesting when I was pregnant with Grant. I literally woke up the first morning I was pregnant with Grant, and told my then husband, I go, I'm pregnant. It's a boy. He's like, you're crazy. And I was right. I was like, I just knew it. I've always had just this feeling with him. So I walk outside, and I just stood outside. I got very quiet and present. And I said, Grant, what do you want me to do? I was like, what does he want? Does he want us to fight for him? What if like we fight for him and he's a vegetable? Like, what do we do? And I stood out there, and I just got the big hit, just fight for me, Mom. And I walked back in there. I said, what are we waiting for? I can get bossy. What are we waiting for? And that was it. Like we went for it, and had him airlifted. There was an amazing hospital in LA, number 2 trauma center in the country. And one doctor there accepted the case at midnight, assembled 5 surgical teams, got a hold of a stent that had been part of a study that was no longer even around, found one, had it airlifted in. It got there at 5:30 in the morning. And he told me later, he goes, yeah, that wasn't really approved for kids. I figured I'd ask for forgiveness. This is the guy you want on your team.
Yeah.
We leave and drive there at 2 a.m. We're driving to LA. We have no idea if he's going to have made the airlift. We have no idea. We get there and we walk in, and here's this doctor. And he said to me, he's like, you the mom, which is pretty obvious. I'm looking completely shell-shocked. And he said, you don't need to worry. I totally got this. This is what I do all the time.
Wow.
No problem. And I'm like, okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then he goes, let me show you where we're going to do the surgery. And it was interesting because there's my son, there's 5 surgical teams getting him ready for surgery. And he's like, let me go take you where we're going to do the surgery. Now, later on, I'm like, that was so smart. He got me the heck out of that room. But he had such good bedside manner.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, I'm going to take you to the waiting room. I'll be back in a couple hours, tell you everything's fine. You just hang out. And I went, all right, came back a couple hours later. He goes, all right, stents in. He's great. No problems. He goes, now I'm just the plumber. I don't know if he's going to wake up or not. That's not my job.
Wow.
I'm like, well, yes, highs and lows, right?
Yeah. Well, that sounds like exactly the kind of person that you want in that scenario on your side.
Yeah. This whole thing was really, we decide how we show up.
Mm-hmm.
And, to me, this whole story and really life is about how you show up. I mean, gosh, the one thing we know for sure, Ari, is we're going to go through some stuff. I mean, like you look at the most successful people, the people who I admire the most in life are not the people who had it easy. They're the people who've gone through things. And I always watch people because you'll hear people say, oh, she was just being a witch because, she's under a lot of stress, or, oh, I had someone like like lie about their hours they were working for me. And he said, oh, but I needed more money because my wife was in the hospital. I'm like, could have asked. I've heard all these things. And Wayne Dyer says that when you squeeze the orange, you get orange juice. It's not when things are great and you show up and you're super nice. That's like no big feat. It's when things are rough and you show up. That's the differentiator. So, that doctor so inspired me with just how he was under like the most crazy pressure. And thankfully, I think I was able to do a lot of that while Grant was in the hospital too.
So what then happened with your son? So that was the cardiologist.
That was a cliffhanger. That was the
What's
cliffhanger.
it?
So what happened? I just left you with like, we may never wake up. So that was the cardiothoracic surgeon. So then we go meet with these neurosurgeons. They were really kind of like Debbie Downer docs. We don't know. And I just decided, I kind of was listening to them talk and all I heard was wah, 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 like, I'm just like going, I'm not going to listen to this. So I kept thinking, as long as he's alive, I have so many friends in the medical field. We can figure this out. I just need to make sure he's alive. And I walked into the ICU, and the adult ICU at Harbor UCLA is pretty rough. And the first day he was there until he got moved to pediatric ICU, like gunshot wounds, people handcuffed to their beds. I mean, it was a rough spot. He was in the corner and it was sunny, and he was there, and he like had a central line and, respirator, ventilator, like all these machines beeping. And I go to, and I hold on to two of his fingers because everything else is literally bandaged or like road rash, and so I'm holding on to these two little fingers, and I am doing everything I can to manage me because I know that he feels me, and I want to make darn sure that I don't transmit any fear or anything else. And so I'm saying, Grant, I've got this. I'm going to get all my friends involved. We're going to help you. We're going to get through this. I go, I just need you to fight. I go, I love you so much. And I've got his little fingers and nothing's happening. And I said, your brother loves you so much. And then I feel a little pressure, a little squeeze because he loves his brother. And then I said, Grammy loves you so much, didn't feel anything. And then I said, your girlfriend, Mackenzie, wants you. She misses you. She wants you to come back. And he lifted my hand off the bed. And that's when I went, all right, you know what? He's with me. Grant is the most stubborn kid I've ever met. And I thought, if anyone can get through this, as his brother said, if anyone can get through this, he can. So I just said, you're going to be 110%, babe. This is going to be the best thing that ever happened to you. Your name means warrior, and you got to fight. And I'm going to pull in every single resource that we need to get you there. So that's your job. Let's go. And that was the thing that kind of kept me going through some of the darkest stuff, is my question. And I think life really comes down to the questions you ask. It's like, what are the quality of the questions? My question was all the time, how do I get you to be 110%? That was it. And there were a lot of times when he didn't even look like he was going to make it through the night. So this was quite, quite a big question. Or, I literally didn't know, as he was coming out of a coma, I didn't know, was he going to be blind, paralyzed, deaf? Like, who knew who was waking up, or if he would ever wake up? You didn't know. So it required a lot of mindset management.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I went for a walk the other day with John Asraf, a mutual friend of ours.
Yes.
And I talked to him about something that I'd never really talked about with anyone, but was kind of on my mind. It was kind of bothering me. I have a son who's a little over 2.5 years old. And, for the last couple of years, I keep having these thoughts pop into my head. What if, when the nanny takes him, they get hit by a car? Or what if, he's at the beach and gets swept away by a wave, or falls off the playground and, gets paralyzed or something like that, or chokes on food, and, all these scenarios of how he could just instantly die and be taken away from me. And I actually had this like thing in the back of my mind, like, what if these are like prophetic visions, that these things are actually going to happen? And so I just expressed this to him, and I'm like, is there a way for me to not have these thoughts? Because these are really unpleasant thoughts. And he just basically said, like, he talked to me about how you can potentially have less of these thoughts, or how you can reframe it when you start to notice it. But probably the biggest thing was he just said, yeah, I used to have those thoughts all the time. And he has two boys who are in their early 20s now, two young men, I should say. And it was actually just profoundly normalizing for me just to
I
hear
was going to
that.
say, you mean like every parent?
Right, exactly. And so that was my thing, is like, is this unique to me and I'm just having these prophetic visions, or is this every
Nope.
parent who has that?
You've just become a parent and you wonder how the heck, like I look at my kids, I go, how did they survive how'd they even survive the first 2 years? Like how? I will tell you though, that once Grant was in the hospital, I didn't allow any of those negative what ifs because I was so afraid that would become reality.
Yeah.
So it was like instant replace. It's like, we're not going there at all. But I think it's pretty typical because, as you know, when you have a kid, it's like a love you never even knew you were capable of having. Like you
Yeah.
just, I remember watching that movie, The Seventh Sign, with Demi Moore, and she says, I will die for you, to her unborn child. And I go, I totally, like, I never would have gotten that till I have a kid. And then you just know that whatever it takes,
Yeah.
with my son sitting there, that's why he's lying in bed, and I check in to make sure, is this what you want? And then once I know that, it's like, whatever I have to do. It's like, whatever. And you get it as a parent. That's why for a parent to hear, oh, he'd be so brain damaged, it wouldn't be worth it. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Are you a parent?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after this, your son, so how old is he now? This was when he was 15. This was 9 years ago.
16. He's just turned 23. I learned that what they show you in the movies is not how it is. So you know how they have the person in the coma in the movies, and then the person wakes up and looks at you and says, I love you. That is not what happens. And the doctors told me that when he woke up, it would be ugly. And so I thought, all right, so maybe he wakes up and screams and then we're okay. It years of ugly. I didn't know. And every brain injury is different, but brain injuries are a very, I think this is one of the most misunderstood, misdiagnosed things going on right now. It's something like 5 million people in the US at any one time are struggling with the effects of a brain injury. And a lot of what it does is give you big mood issues, massive depression, and suicidal tendencies. So when Grant first came out of the coma, which again is not wake up and say, I love you, it's he opened his eyes, looked away to the side, and started moving the only arm. Everything was in a cast except for one arm. So he just moved that back and forth all day for days. And so, as you can imagine, this required a lot of good, positive self-talk. Because the first time looking at that going, uh-oh, because you don't know. I mean, there's no crystal ball to say, oh, okay, this is just a phase. Luckily, I had some people from Mindshare who were coming in, Dr. Suzanne Bennett, Dr. Hyla Cass, Dr. Prudence Hall, Dr. Daniel Lehman, Dr. Ann Myers. And Dr. Ann Myers would come on Friday nights and she'd go, this is great. He looks great. She worked in a brain trauma unit. So she'd come in and go, he's making amazing progress. And I'd look and I go, he is, wow. Okay. So she just was so positive, telling me it was going to be so great and he's doing so well. And I'm like, all right, I'm going with what she's saying. But it took a lot of, it was very, very challenging because, some of the stuff took so much time and you're like going, oh my gosh, is he ever going to get back? How do you know? So I had to just stick with, he's going to be 110%. And I always had the next thing that I was working on with him. And I was always looking at what wins did he have today? What are the little things that he did today? And it's very much like coming out of a coma when you've had a severe traumatic brain injury. His first 6 months was sort of like the first 2 years of a baby's life, except that your baby now is, 150 pounds, not 10 to 20 pounds. And then all of a sudden he got stuck in the terrible twos, because one of the things that happens with brain injuries is they lose their internal editor and he would get very violent and very scary and very angry, and you never knew when it was going to happen. It was frightening. We had him in the Children's Hospital in LA, and we had to have him in a zip-up bed with a 24-hour security guard.
Wow.
Sitting outside. Yeah, it's absolutely frightening. But we got through that. We got through multiple suicide attempts because as he started to heal, he started to get into those deep depressions and despair that happen with brain injuries. In fact, I still remember, it's like sometimes you just have to keep your sense of humor along with your sense of hope, and I remember at one point, my ex-husband and I are lying on top of Grant, who's just swallowed a handful of pills. My other sons called the paramedics. We're on top of him, holding them down, The paramedics walk in, they're like, okay, so, because they got very used to what was going on. But, I will tell you now, he's 23. He is better than he was before the accident. He still has some issues from a brain injury, but there's also, just as there is issues, there's gifts as well. So again, I think, you get what you focus on. If I look for the good in what happened here, like, he is so much more self-aware. He is incredible with some of the skills he's developed. And he, remarkably, here's a kid who was literally run down in the street and left for dead. And he has a crushed heel, both femurs broken, like all these injuries. He can do sports. He can run. I'm like, the only thing that he had physically was a loss of hearing in one ear. And the doctor said he'd never hear in that ear again. And he's gotten some of it back because he just was like, not going to believe that. So when you look at it, you go, I don't even know how that could have possibly have happened. And he's become a voracious reader. He does art. He does gardening. So he's like, it's really quite amazing what he's done with all of this stuff. And it's, he's still in the healing process.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. I feel like you have displayed, like, through this process, in incredible, an extraordinary, in the true sense of that word, level of courage and resilience. I want to almost contrast this with a quick little story from my life, because I went through, on the first pregnancy with my son, Mateo, my wife went for a routine checkup during the pregnancy when she was about 6 months pregnant. And the nurse who was working on her said, oh my gosh, when they were doing the ultrasound, she said, oh my gosh, you're funneling, you're going into labor right now. And then they rushed her into the hospital and basically, like, had her strapped to the bed and were preparing for labor, like, imminently. And I get a call, and my wife's crying, and she's like, they told me I'm going into labor right now, and I'm only 6 months pregnant. And then so she's there, and she spent a total of about 48 or maybe close to 72 hours in the hospital. It was 3 nights stay there. And on the second day, the different specialist doctors came in, and one of them was a perinatologist. I forget the name of the other one. But I remember having these discussions with the perinatologist, basically where he's breaking down the statistics of, hey, when babies are born this early, this prematurely, you have this percentage chance that the baby is going to die. You have this percentage chance that if the baby lives, they'll have this problem or that problem or brain damage or all these things. And I was freaking terrified. I mean, I was absolutely like, my life is about to change in like a horrible way. There's this big tragedy about to happen to me. And that was like one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. And I was in full panic mode. And I can only imagine what you went through. And the fact that it wasn't, to wrap my story up, it turned out that it was actually a misdiagnosis. So she was there totally unnecessarily. She wasn't at all going into labor, and they were wrong. So the guy who was a specialist came in and was like, this is false funneling, not real funneling. You're not going into labor.
But here's the thing, it's like, isn't it funny? You're like, oh my gosh, they messed that up. But you're thinking, well, wouldn't you rather have them err on that side than err on the other side?
Yes, I would. However, I wish that they would have come in and had the specialist look at it within
a little sooner
hours, and so that we didn't have to suffer unnecessarily for 2 days. But
oh my gosh, I know the stress hormones that go to the baby when that happens. It's like,
yeah, and we actually did do an intervention too. They administer a corticosteroid intravenously as a way to stimulate rapid lung development in the baby to help increase the odds of survival. So we actually did an intervention based on this false diagnosis. But anyway, my point was that that was unbelievably terrifying. And I feel like what you're talking about was vastly worse, vastly more terrifying. And yet you were so courageous and so resilient and so positive in terms of your mindset through this whole process. How is that possible? Is this just something, is this something you were
I'm
born
an
with, or
alien.
what?
Yeah, I'm an alien. I don't, you know. So it was interesting when I was writing the book because my publisher and agent, they're like, well, you've got to, explain how freaked out you were and upset. And I go, but that's not what I did. Like, that's not how I responded. Like, I actually respond in a crisis very differently because I've been trained on how to respond in a crisis. It's just like when you look at ER docs or paramedics, they're not going to go running to an accident scene and go, oh my gosh, like,
Yeah.
no, they've been trained. So when you look at this, we actually can learn how to show up when things are challenging, because when you really look at it, like, go back into elementary school and junior high and high school, what we really need to learn is how to show up and how to have great relationships and how to be a good friend. Like, because these are the things, most of us are going to end up being caretakers in our life, either for, children or for parents. It's just part of life. I was fortunate in my 30s, early 30s, like it was actually late 20s, early 30s, I got a mentor. And she was going to teach me how to be successful in business so I could make a bigger impact on the world. And I go move in with her, and I'm so excited. I'm going to learn how to be successful in business because I have this, I want to help the world get healthy, and she's going to help me do it. And she didn't teach me anything related to business for 6 months. And for 6 months, all she did was work on mindset training. Turns out she was one of the top mindset trainers anywhere. And, but I was so frustrated at first because I was like, first of all, I was like, how am I gonna survive and pay my bills here? I just sold everything and moved in with you. But she kept saying, you're not ready. And if you look at where people are in life, the most successful people just have gone through the most challenges. It's like, it's just like, baseball. If you want to have the most home runs, have, the most strikeouts. I mean, it's just how life works. And so what she taught me right from there is that there are no limitations. This is one of the first things she taught me, is there are no limitations. There are only limitations in your mind, to which I thought back then, very left brain, of course there's limitations, Then she said, there is no right or wrong. There just is. I'm like, of course there's right or wrong. I mean, it's like, so she was telling me these things that I was like, made me question everything. But when you think about it, if you were to approach something, and here's the doctor coming in to tell you the percent chance that your son's going to be brain damaged or your son's not going to survive, what about the percent chance that everything's going to be all right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would, when they told me, your son has a 0.25% chance of making it, I'm like, great, that's all I need. That's what I'm going to focus on. I'm not focusing on the other 99.75% because it does not matter. That's all that matters. So that came from that training of, you get what you expect.
Mm-hmm.
There are no victims, only volunteers. And that if you want something to be better, then you need to make yourself stronger. Wish it was easier.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of that stuff was so entrenched in me that it basically taught me that I could pretty much create or manifest anything that I wanted. And I couldn't change the circumstance. I couldn't change whether Grant got hit by the car, and I couldn't really change the chance whether he was going to survive or not. But I could change how I showed up. I could change how I chose to help, who I chose to recruit, what I could do. That was all in my control. And so that's what I did. And I will tell you, it wasn't like I walk into the hospital, they tell me he got hit, and I went, okay, no. I mean, I had to process it. But even then, it was my brain searching for, how can I fix this? What can I do here? That's just where my brain went. And
Yeah.
I think if you have something like that to hold on to, it keeps you going even when it's really dark. And some of those times, especially Friday nights in the hospital, for some reason were so depressing to me because no one was around. It was always just me sitting there with my son, with the machines beeping, hoping for something. But I would look for signs. I'd look for what I called little miracles, as little wins. Like, he'd squeeze my finger or make eye contact, or I would sneak in all sorts of things. Like I'd throw little balls into his hand to see if he could catch and squeeze. I'd look for anything to show me that he was improving.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like what you what's that word? It's like basically, it's like you get what you expect. I just expected him to make it through there. And I knew that if he didn't make it, but that I'd done everything that I possibly could to help him get there, I could be at peace with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the things you said there, and I'm going to maybe not quote you exactly, but basically something to the effect of the people with the strongest mindset, the people who are the most resilient, are the ones who have been through the most stuff. How do we cultivate resilience in the absence of tragedy, in the absence of going through really horrible things? Is it possible, or is this something that's just like any degree of intellectual understanding and sort of practicing the mindset stuff doesn't actually translate into real toughness when it actually matters?
Well, I didn't have the tragedy before. I had the mindset before the tragedy.
Mm.
The time to get the mindset is not when you're in the middle of the tragedy. That's like, drowning in the ocean and you've got an unblown up life preserver, I mean, so you've got to develop it first. And literally what I did way back when, it was back in the days of the Sony Walkman. You probably don't even know what this thing is.
I do.
Okay.
I'm 35. I'm not quite young, but
I was like, it's this little thing. They put tapes in it. You put it in your ears. And I used to get these tapes from Nightingale Conant, Brian Tracy, Zig Ziglar, Og Mandino. I tightly controlled my environment. I stopped listening to the news. I mean, if there wasn't a better time than now to not listen to the news, I don't know when there is. Like, oh my gosh.
yeah.
So I did, when you look at what's going on out there, it's mainly negative stuff. So I stopped with all of that. I started managing my environment, what I read, who I spent time with. I spent time with people. I mean, that's why, Mindshare Summit's so cool, is it's a tightly curated event of people who want to help each other and want to be better themselves and make a bigger difference in the world. And so I made sure those were the people I was spending time with. That was the things I was reading and listening to. And that's started to make the big difference. And then I started just to watch how all the things that happen, because it doesn't take a big tragedy to test you. We're tested every day. I remember back when I was working one-on-one with clients, I had one gal who was so stressed out and having so many challenges. Her daughter was getting bat mitzvahed. That was her big stress, her big challenge, right? So it doesn't need to be some massive thing. It could be someone cutting you off at a red light. How do you respond?
Mm-hmm.
It could be someone like, stealing your blog post. How do you respond? I watch people. I'm like, really? That's like these things. Like every time is an opportunity for you to show up better, right? There's all sorts of opportunities for it. And each time, I think what happens is you don't realize how many things most people would think are little things, or big things that you don't even recognize anymore. It's that whole don't sweat the small stuff thing.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, but I've noticed a psychological tendency, and I don't know if there's any actual scientific literature on this or if there's any scientific terminology around this phenomenon, but I've noticed that people seem to all normalize to whatever level of challenge they have in their life. And whatever level of challenge, no matter how objectively easy someone may have it, almost everybody perceives themselves to be struggling, perceives themselves to have it hard, and perceives themselves to be stressed. And there's some people that I encounter that have really, really easy lives,
Yeah.
and perceive themselves to be terribly stressed and have it really hard. And I'm like, you should maybe like travel a bit and
But
see,
it's so great.
how hard people actually have it.
I know. Let's drop you off in some of these countries.
Yeah.
It's because it's perception, it can be shifted.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's what's so super cool about it is I think a lot of it's our languaging. It's funny. I was talking to my son and he was upset about something. And I go, I listen to you whenever you get upset, you use this, like, I'm stressed out of my mind. I'm like, maybe we could shift that language, because I actually believe that we're never better than when we're challenged, that when we have something that's bigger than us that we need to work against or work for or towards, like that's when you really show up. That's your opportunity to show up as your best self. I think that the challenge we have is that our society like almost celebrates people being so stressed out and and it's like ridiculous, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, I have one friend who I can't really spend much time with anymore because every time you call her, she's so slammed and she's so busy and she's so stressed. I'm like,
Yeah.
man, I actually get done 10 times what you get done. And I don't ever spend one time bit saying that or complaining about it. And I
Yeah.
think that's the other part. It's like, what's the difference between I get to and I have to,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, you know, right now I'm unpacking in my new house and you might go, oh my gosh, I have to unpack. And I'm like, I get to unpack in a like new house on the water in Tampa. Oh my gosh, I'm so lucky. Right.
Yeah.
So it's just changing that perspective. And I think that the easiest way to do that is to watch who you hang out with, because if you're hanging out with positive people, they will call you on it and go, hey, you know, help you reframe it. Right. I mean, John Assaraf's a great example of one.
Yeah.
I've listened to his languaging. He has great languaging around it.
He does. Yeah. I remember when I was his personal trainer 10 years ago. And I remember one day he had something where like his business partner for this business that they had a stroke, and there was like the business was like falling apart. And he was like, somehow he showed up for his training session that morning and he had a big smile on his face and he was happy. And he was telling me about the whole thing. He was, I mean, like his normal level of happiness. And I'm like, he told me the whole story of what happened. And I'm like, how are you happy right now? I don't even understand what's happening. Cause like I would be fuming, I would be terrified, I would be, I would be panicking. And somehow he was happening. He's like, he said to me, how would panicking right now help anything? And so he's like, just, so how do we get to that place? Like you are embodying, he's embodying, where you are the opposite of that pattern that I just talked about, of somebody who objectively doesn't have it that hard, doesn't have a lot of struggles, but perceives themselves to be stressed and have a really difficult life. How do we be in the opposite scenario where we may actually have lots of real challenges in our life, but we handle them with ease and with a smile and, while remaining happy and in a good
Yeah.
place?
Well, Carol Dweck out of Stanford talks about this growth versus fixed mindset. So the first part of it is knowing that you actually can shift this. It's all in your power to do so. And it's like anything else. It's like exercise, mindset's a muscle. You need to take it to the gym. And the stuff that I learned back in my late 20s, early 30s became so much a part of me. And it didn't happen overnight. It happened over time. I'll share some of the things she did. But it became so much a part of me that when I wrote this book, when the whole thing happened with Grant, everyone's like, I don't understand. How the heck are you doing this? Because I launched a New York Times bestselling book next to my son in a coma. I have the pictures of me with my laptop sitting next to him in a coma, talking to him, doing this. And like, I don't even get how you did that. And I had forgotten that I even had this mentor. I'd forgotten all the training that we'd gone through because I was it. It became me. It was who I was. And I wasn't that way when I met her. I had total limiting beliefs, super judgmental. There are right or wrong. Of course, it's like you can't just create something. And it happened over time. It happened with her first putting rubber bands on my wrist, and everything time I thought of a critical or limiting belief, a critical thought, limiting belief, I had to snap my wrist. And you do that enough, you stop doing it, And then I started to really tightly control the people that I spent time around. I have an amazing group of friends, and I'm really careful about who I let into that inner circle. I have a helper mentality. I always want to kind of like rescue those negative Nellies out there, but if they're not changing, then, let them be. And then always surround yourself with like the books that you read. What are the podcasts that you're listening to? What are you doing? And it's easier now than ever, really. It's harder and it's easier. It's harder because there's all this silly stuff all over the place. I mean, it's like, all the politics and ridiculousness. But it's easier because we can decide which podcasts, right? We can decide which blogs, we can block things. So, it's just making that part of your daily practice every day, getting up, getting out your journal, writing down 3 things you appreciate, you're grateful for. That's so easy. Doesn't cost anything. Ending the day, looking at 3 things that went great today. And it could be that you are alive at the end of the day. That's a great day. It's like you're at the end of the day and you're in a house with running water and electricity. You've got a majority of the people in the world, you've got it easier than them. So, it's like, celebrate that.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. Sometimes when my kids start to talk, and, my kids are not spoiled kids by any means, but sometimes I'm like, I think I really need to take you and go drop you off in a third world country so you really start to understand what you have here.
Yeah.
But
I remember, real quick on that note, I grew up doing a ton of traveling all over the world with my parents since I was a baby. Like I was 13-month old in Morocco saying my first words,
wow.
and Turkey, and all through the Middle East and Asia and Europe. And I did a lot of traveling as a kid. And I remember being like maybe 6 years old or something like that. I have this vivid memory in my mind still to this day of walking across this bridge in Istanbul, Turkey, and seeing this mom. I was walking with my mom, and I saw this mom with her son begging. They were homeless on the bridge. And the son was just about my age, and maybe he almost even looked similar to me. And I just kind of I looked at him, and he almost looked like he could be my brother. And I remember feeling like, man, what if I was switched? Like you're with your mom, I'm with my mom, we're the same age. What if our places were switched? And how different our lives are. And those experiences, I think, really shaped me in a big way.
Because you know what? They so easily could.
Yeah.
There are times when I look at, over the last 6 years, it's been a struggle with Grant. I was like, oh, and then it's like the universe provides. Anytime that starts to happen, I'll be walking by someone in the airport and there's a child in a wheelchair who's clearly quadriplegic or something. And I'm like going, you know what? You are so fortunate. So, we just are so fortunate. We have to remind ourselves that. So I think that the important thing here is that we need to, this is of anything that you could do to make the biggest impact in how you're going to be on the planet, like in terms of your health, your business, everything else. It all starts with mindset. Every program I ever wrote in health, I always started first with the mindset piece of it. When I went to write this book, the publisher's like, well, mindset, but you don't talk about mindset. I go, read my books. Like every single book, the first part is, why is this important? How are you worth it? Like that all has to always guide everything.
Well, let's dig into that a bit deeper. I wanted to ask you, how does all of this tie into health specifically? So there's going to be different people who are listening to this. Some people are just interested in health, and maybe you want to tie mindset into that, or they want to hear you tie mindset into that. And then other people are fascinated with psychological resilience and how do I go through challenges in my life, and instead of being traumatized by them and have my growth stunted, how do I grow and become stronger and more resilient?
Yeah, let's go with that one first, and I'll tell you about the other one, something interesting that came out of my community. Because when I was writing the book, I started studying forgiveness. And I started studying forgiveness because I went and did 40 years of Zen with Dave. I didn't know what I was getting into. He just told me I had to do it. He's very pushy and bossy, so I went. And I kid. But as what it is you learn how to forgive with electrodes on your head. So basically, if you're lying, the machine catches you. It's fantastic because it helps you learn how to do a process that you can do anytime, anywhere. It's an active forgiveness process. And what you don't realize is that if you still have some kind of charge around a person, something they've done, you haven't fully forgiven them. It doesn't mean you're calling them on the phone going, I forgive you. It's got nothing to do with that. It's you going through a process to really understand what went on, how that impacted you, who they are. They're getting empathy for them, and then really going through the process of fully forgiving them yourself so that you get set free. And what the research shows, one of the top forgiveness researchers was talking about like situations like Columbine. What they find is the people who have the least psychological impact. They have the best mental health outcomes afterwards are the people who forgive the fastest.
Mm.
And what was incredible about this researcher is as he was going through and doing all this research and discovering this, his mother was murdered.
Wow.
And he said 24 hours after his mother was murdered, he was actively forgiving the murderer.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, wow, that's like walking your talk. I don't know that I could do that quickly, but it is a really important one to remember because these things I think are like, tumors inside of us eating us up. So that's the first one is forgiveness. On the community, on the health side, this was a very interesting thing. We queried our community a couple years ago and we asked this question. It was just an open-ended question. And we said, if you are not where you want to be with your health, why not? Right now, think about my community. The answers you would have thought would be like, oh, I can't quit my cheese pizza, or I like can't stop the sugar. So I was fully expecting a very different answer than what I got. And the answer I got the most, and we got huge like novels written because they could write as much as they wanted. And the most common answer was because I don't feel worthy.
Mm.
And so think about how you treat yourself if you are not enough. Right. So when you really look at like, I look at where I am in my career and I always said to myself, I'll make $10 million when I'm 50. By 50, I'll make $10 million. Now, I look at the money as important for what you can do with the money, and what the money signifies is how many people that you can help, right? That's what I'm looking at here. So what if I'd said that I was going to do that by 30?
Mm.
Because I will tell you that I completely scrambled the last couple years to make sure that I got to where I wanted to be when I said what I was going to do by 50. And I thought, well, why did I say 50? Why didn't I say 40? What if I'd said 30? Right? That, all of a sudden, what would I have done to make that happen? When Grant got hit and I said, all right, Grant, we're going to do whatever we need to do to make you 110%. Well, 110% doesn't exist. But I thought, I don't mind falling short of 110%. I just don't want to say, hey, we're just going to help you survive, because he could survive and be a vegetable.
Mm-hmm.
So ask those right questions there, right? But it has to come from a place of already being enough. And that's what I find. And to have some deep why and purpose for why you want to do this, not I want to lose 10 pounds for my high school reunion is a far better thing, far different goal than I really want to be a role model for my son. I want to make sure he leaves, has a healthy life and a quality life. So I'm going to do that too, because I know that if I'm smoking and sitting on the couch, then that just gave him permission to smoke and sit on the couch.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What is the most surprising lesson to come out of all this? The most surprising thing from your book, or kind of the most unexpected thing that you've learned from this whole process of what you went through?
So one of the things that really surprised me, and you hear this all the time, you hear it all the time in our community, I know I was this way, is I never wanted to ask for help. Like I love to give help, but I don't like to ask for help. It's like, and so I started to really dig into, because the minute this happened, I sent an email out to my entire community. I said, listen, I don't need your sympathy, but I need your support. Any ideas you have. And what started to happen, we had people come to the hospital. I mean, I had friends coming from all over the place, but I also had people who came to the hospital to pray for Grant, who I did not know.
Wow.
And they drove hours to do this.
Wow.
I had one woman who dropped off a basket of healthy food every week. I mean, just people showed up. And as I was watching this, I thought, I want to be that person. Like I don't think anyone's gotten to the end of their life and said, boy, I wish I wasn't so kind and generous, So I was like going, I'd love to be more kind, more generous, more empathetic. But I think that asking for help is one of the most courageous things that you can do. And it makes you vulnerable, but there's so much strength in it too.
Mm.
And it's really changed now for how I feel about asking for help, because I realized that those people coming to the hospital, doing all of those things, they were actually getting something from doing that. And when we went back to the hospital at Christmas time to bring gifts, because Grant was feeling depressed, and I thought, you know what, I'll take him there and give him a sense of purpose and have him talk to some of the other kids. So we brought a bunch of presents and we went to Children's Hospital to bring him gifts. And there was a 16-year-old girl there whose family was in Guam. Her mom and dad were there. They were living at the Ronald McDonald House. Her sisters, though, were back in Guam. She'd lost her only brother to leukemia. She's got leukemia. And all she wants for Christmas is to see her daughters or her sisters. And she is, again, they are there as basically a charity case with the hospital. And I'm listening to this, and Grant's connecting with her and talking to her and talking to the mom. And I said, I have all these airline miles, so I'm going to fly your daughters out as a Christmas present for your daughter. And she goes, oh my gosh, you can't do that. And I go, yes, I can totally do that. This will be awesome. Let's do this. Well, I go find out that, I hate to admit, I was like, where is Guam? Didn't know where Guam was. Turns out that my airline miles weren't working for Guam. Like, it's a far, far place, and American Airlines doesn't fly there.
You're like, Guam, that's a city in California, right?
I was like, Guam, yeah, where is that? It's near Modesto. So anyway, it was a $5,000 plane ride for those girls. And it was one of the highlights, honestly, of my life was to so I just was like, I'm doing this. I already said I was going to do this, and whatever I need to do to make this happen, I'm doing. And I get this picture of these girls coming together. And by the way, it was the last time they saw their sister. And it's like one of the best things that I've ever experienced in my life. So you think about it, you think it's actually kind of selfish for us not to ask for help, because you hear about all the time, when you give to someone, you get so much back, right? And you don't ever want to think transactionally, but boy, that was just such a great thing, and a great thing for my kids as well. So that was a big lesson, is if you're like afraid to ask for help, get over it.
Yeah, that's a good lesson for me. Actually, I took that one very personally, because I'm definitely one of those people that has a very hard time asking for help. So
yeah, you'd be amazed if, when you've got your 16-year-old son lying between life and death, you're like, all right, you know what? I'm going to get over this one right now, real quick.
Yeah.
But again, I would ask you, do you like helping other people?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Well, we can't all just help people.
Yeah, that's very
Someone's
true.
got to accept it.
Yeah. So my final question to you is, where do people start with all of this? And can you give people like maybe a recap of the top 3 things, whether you've either covered them already in the interview or a couple ideas that you haven't covered, the top 3 things that you want to leave people with, and like a practical strategy to start with today of how to change their mindset, how to develop more resilience.
This is going to be fantastic. First of all, look at opportunities differently. One of the things that mentor had me do early on, first of all, I was not allowed to talk to her till afternoon, because she found that most people, when they came to her in the morning, whatever it was they needed help with, by the time they got to the afternoon, they'd figured it out themselves. If they still needed help in the afternoon, I could go. But I also could never present anything as a problem. Problems didn't exist in her life. They were always either challenges or opportunities. That was it. So I think the first thing really is to realize that a lot of these things showing up, I don't know one person, Ari, who's, goes through an amazing day. Everything is perfect for them. And they, at the end of the day, goes, boy, I became a better person today. I grew a lot today. Like, we grow when we're challenged. We grow when things are challenging. So, when you're going through some rough stuff, just remember that you're going to get through it, and you will become better because of it. We were all sitting around the dinner table, and Bryce, my younger son, was like, we're a closer, my ex-husband and my new husband are great friends. We all hang out together, and we are so much closer and such better people because of this. So, on the other side, you always end up better. Now, what I was looking for was like some kind of thing that I always like a framework and something that you can take with you so you can start to put this into immediate action. Because again, if we decide that we have a growth mindset and it's a muscle, then we need to train it. So I'm going to give everyone this as a download as well. I did a video on it, but I'll walk you through it too. And I'm a big journaler. I think journals are the most underused, most powerful tool that we have. And I think it's especially important to put your pen to paper. So in the morning, I call this my jam, gratitude in the morning. Write down 3 things you're grateful for. Super simple, totally simple. And some mornings you may wake up and go, I'm not feeling grateful for anything. But the minute you ask that right question, what am I grateful for today? Things start to pop up. And if you have more than 3, just keep writing. So that's the first piece. That's the first thing you do in the morning. Open that. I have my journal. It's always right next to me in my bed on my nightstand table. Pull it out, pen, write it down. Then throughout the day, if you get in a bad mood, someone cuts you off, you start to feel yourself going sideways. The way you can shift that state quickly is pull out your phone and send a text to someone, preferably someone you haven't talked to for a while, and tell them something that you appreciate about them. And what's incredible about that is when you send a text to someone, like I just sent a text 2 days ago. I was thinking, I keep thinking about Joe Polish. And I'm just going to send Joe a little text and tell him how much I appreciate him. And he gives like instant phone call back. Oh my gosh. They're just, it's like you get a little love fest from this.
Yeah.
Then end of the day, and this is so important, and this is kind of what kept me from going down into the dark holes with Grant, is the end of the day, I'd go, all right, what were the little miracles today? Like you might think of them as the wins. What happened? Sometimes it was like he squeezed my finger, he tracked my eyes, he like smacked his lips, whatever it was. I was like, what happened today? So think of 3 things, 3 little miracles: gratitude, appreciation, miracles. That is it. That's simple. If you just make a commitment, we do like challenges in my community on these things. Right now, on my team, they're doing a gratitude challenge. So we do these challenges because, again, you want to get used to how you respond. You can train how you respond. By the time I got to that situation with Grant, I'd gone through a lot of different challenges that had trained me to be able to show up in that situation and not freak out. Right? So it's possible. I will tell you, after what you went through, if you get faced with another situation, you're not going to go to where you went, because you've already been through it. Now you've learned some things, right? But you can learn way more by just start with that little thing. It's so easy.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, JJ, I have to say, this is a very atypical interview for my podcast. Yeah. Like normally we're geeking out on biochemistry and all kinds of geeky science stuff. And so this is an unusual topic, but I have to say this has actually been one of my absolute favorite interviews on a personal level. I've really, really enjoyed this. And thank you for coming on the show. I also want to say, just on a personal note, I feel somewhat of a debt of gratitude to you. Like, you've been very kind to me in ways that when probably most people wouldn't have. Like our original interaction when I was introduced to you through John Assaraf when I was a young kid and in my mid-20s and just starting to try and transition to building my business online. I was introduced to you and I didn't really know how to interact with someone like you or what this process should entail. And I didn't realize it, but I was kind of I didn't really understand the interaction, and I was kind of rude about the way I was going about it and kind of was trying say, hey, can you help me? But without really reciprocating in any way. And you were very kind to me at that time. You were kind of like, you got some things to learn. But you actually, a little over a year ago, you pulled me aside at a conference we were at and actually took an hour of your time to help teach me some stuff. And you've just gone out of your way to be kind to me, I think, in ways that most people wouldn't. And I want you to know that I really, really appreciate that. And again, really, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. I want to recommend to everybody listening, get JJ's book, Warrior Mom. If you find this topic fascinating at all, it's a phenomenal book. I really highly recommend it. And Also, if you are a health professional, sign up for her Mindshare Summit. It's something I've gone to for the last, well, this would be my 4th year coming up in a few weeks here. I don't know if, can you still actually register for that, or is it closed already?
No, you can still register.
Okay. I'm going to try and rush this podcast so that there's time because I know it's what, August 14th?
August 8th through the 11th. I just want to know what your costume is.
Yeah. You know what? Actually, I don't even know if I'm hoping that I'll be able to go, but it's very possible I won't because my daughter is due on August 11th. So it's
exciting.
Possible that the baby, I have a feeling that she's probably going to come about a week early or a few days early.
You never know. My second was a week late.
And I miss one of the days or something like that. But
very exciting.
Yeah.
Fun.
But again, if for everybody listening who's a health professional, highly recommend you look into the Mindshare Summit. It's been a huge asset for me, a huge part of my own growth. And JJ, really such a pleasure having you on. And I hope to do this again at some point.
Thank you. Appreciate you. I always love to have you on mine too.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right. See you.
Hey there, this is Ari again. One more quick thing before you go. Just make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Energy Blueprint, and also make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's iTunes or Stitcher or anything else. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview, and I will see you again next week.